Okay, British and the colonies. We ready? Population of British colonies ethnicity-wise. These three groups I wrote up here in brown are the three major groups of people in the colonies in the 1700s. English, Scotch-Irish, Scotch, some Germans, and some Africans. Okay? The Scotch-Irish are people who what? What's the difference between somebody Scotch-Irish and somebody Scotch? No, potatoes is not it. In the 1500s, the British took over Ireland. They asked a lot of British people, but also a lot of Scottish people to go to Ireland and take over the farmland and become, like, in essence, lords of their own land. The people who went from Scotland still continued their Scottish ways, but they lived in Ireland, they were born in Ireland, but they considered themselves to be Scottish. A lot of them came to America because they were tired of living in Ireland and the hassles with the Irish people, okay? So there are actually quite a few Scotch-Irish who come into this country, especially in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, those farming middle colonies, okay? Colonial women's role, how did it change? Well, colonial women had far more equality than women did in Europe. They were viewed as economically important. As families prospered in America, they had servants, indentured servants or slaves to do the work for them, okay? Sir Edmund Andros, remember the Dominion of New England? Where the king tried to make all of New England one big colony? And he sent over a guy named Sir Edmund Andros to be his governor. He was very unpopular because he made people reapply for deeds to their farm. He imposed new taxes. He took away democracy in New England. And then in England, the Glorious Revolution occurred, which we'll talk about in a minute. And what happened to Sir Edmund Andros? He tries to escape. Okay, and then he doesn't get killed. They let him go back to England. Okay. Jacob Leisler, what rebellion associated with the Glorious Revolution? The answer is Jacob Leisler's rebellion. He was a colonist in New York who opposed the Dominion of New England and started a little revolt. He was taken by Andros's lieutenant and tried for treason, hanged, and then the word came that the Glorious Revolution had taken place and the Dominion of New England was over. So he was pardoned posthumously, which means that didn't do him a bit of good because he's still deader than a doornail, but at least his family could be happy that he was not a traitor. What was the Glorious Revolution? It's when the English people said to King James II, either you leave the throne or we do to you what we did to Daddy, which was behead him. Okay, Charles I was his father. And the English people beheaded him. James chose to keep his head. Why did they get rid of James? Because James had gotten married a second time. James's first wife died. She was Protestant. He had two daughters, Mary and Anne. Mary was married to William of Orange, meaning she was now part of the Dutch royal family. And the daughter Anne had a husband in England. When he remarries a young woman who's Catholic. She promptly gives birth to a son. Okay, this is post Elizabeth. That son will now take the throne over the two daughters. So the English people don't want a Catholic king anymore. They're tired of James is pretty Catholic, so they just say to him, get out. And he chooses to get out. Okay? Georgia was founded for two purposes. Okay, Georgia was a proprietary colony, and one purpose was a buffer between Spain and South Carolina. That's why the English king gives the land to a group of investors, the number one being James Oglethorpe, okay, or proprietor. Oglethorpe's intention for Georgia was to make a colony for debtors, a safe place for debtors to go. Did very many debtors come to Georgia? Ultimately, no. Okay. Georgia and slavery. As long as Oglethorpe was alive, Georgia was not allowed to have slavery. But when he died in the 1720s or 30s, and Georgia started having slavery. Okay? Why did Scotch-Irish not go to the South? 2 reasons. First and foremost, because of slavery. They disapproved of slavery. And secondly, because of the climate. It was too hot for them. And they didn't, in the South they raised crops that the Scotch-Irish weren't familiar with. Okay? Purpose of colonial cities. The answer is trade, commerce, business, whatever word you want to use. Cities were almost always pretty coastal. That's where people brought their goods, they traded, that kind of thing. The wealth in the colonies. If you were in New England or the North and you were wealthy, you probably did one of 2 things. You were involved in business or trade, or you were into shipbuilding. Eventually, by the mid-1700s, you could be a rum maker too and make a lot of money. But that was a trading item too, so it would put you into trade. If you were a Southerner and you were wealthy, you were a tobacco farmer or a rice farmer. You owned a lot of land. You probably had slaves, or if not indentured servants, but usually slaves by 1700. If you lived in the middle colonies, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and you were wealthy, it just meant you owned a lot of land and you exported a lot of grain, like wheat, barley, rye. Where was slavery legal in the colonies in the 1700s? Everywhere, a few colonies, nowhere. Nope.
Nowhere.
Everywhere. Until the late 1700s, right around the time of the Revolution, slavery was legal everywhere in the 13 colonies. The first colony to do away with slavery was Vermont. And that was around the time of the Revolution. Okay? By 1800, they'd gotten rid of slavery in most of New England and the middle colonies, with the exception of Delaware. Okay. Mercantilism. Mercantilism is an economic policy where everything is done for the good of the mother country. The mother country, in this case Britain, should export more than she imports. So she needs a place to sell her finished goods, get yourself a colony. You need raw materials to make finished goods, get yourself a colony so you can import them very cheaply. Okay? Salutary neglect, the British policy towards the American colonies from 1607 to 1763. They didn't pay them a lot of attention. The British didn't send over a lot of officials. They only half-heartedly enforced the Navigation Act or mercantilist policies.
What were the dates?
1607 to 1763 for salutary neglect. Yeah. Navigation Acts. In 1660, the British make the first attempt to try to force more control over the colonies. This would be economic control. The Navigation Act stated, first of all, that all goods coming in and out of the American colonies had to be coming in or out of English boats. And secondly, it provides a list of enumerated goods. Do you see not the next term, but the one after the enumerated goods? Enumerated goods are things which could be sold only to England. So tobacco. You were a tobacco farmer in Virginia. Your tobacco would be sold only to Britain. They would charge all the appropriate taxes, and then they would turn around and sell it to people in France or Holland, whatever. You could not, as an American farmer of tobacco, sell your tobacco to a Dutch agent who would then take it back to Holland and had to go through England. Okay? Any questions on that? You all understand how enumerated goods work? All right, so back to the next question. Navigation Acts were part of a British policy known as A, isolationism, B, capitalism, C, mercantilism, D, monopolism, E, imperialism. Mercantilism. Mercantilism. No. If you put capitalism, you're wrong.